Hi everybody, it's Krish Kandaya here and welcome to the latest edition of FAQ Faith and Quarantine. This week it's Mental Health Awareness Week, and so I've been drawing on the life and teaching of Jeremiah. He's a prophet in the Old Testament who is sometimes known as the weeping prophet, and today we'll see exactly why that is. I don't know how lockdown is affecting your emotional life. For many of us, it's causing us to have highs and lows. Some of us are enjoying the fact that we're not in the kind of treadmill or the kind of rat race of life. Life is at a different pace. We're enjoying the bird song, we're enjoying the relaxation and the extra time that we've got. But for other people, it's causing us to have all sorts of anxieties and challenges in life. And it's wreaking havoc with our emotional life. And I'm hoping as we spend a little bit of time in the book of Jeremiah, you'll find a way to be able to regulate that and deal with that as Jeremiah does. Now, again, I'm no mental health expert. If you're feeling like you've got a serious challenge, then please contact a professional. But I do believe the Bible's got something to say to all of us, however we're feeling, however lockdown is being experienced by us. Jeremiah chapter 11 kind of begins to get us into what are known as the confessions or the complaints of Jeremiah. He's not just a prophet who has a message from God to the nation. He also has words that he wants to say to God, things that he's wrestling with. I want to read to you what the first thing is that kind of kicks him off. Have a look at Jeremiah chapter 11 verse 18. Because the Lord revealed their plot to me, I knew it. For at that time he showed me what they were doing. I had been like a gentle lamb led to the slaughter. I did not realize they had plotted against me, saying, let us destroy the tree and its fruit. Let us cut him off from the land of the living, that his name be remembered no more. But, O Lord Almighty, you who judge righteously and test the heart and mind, let me see your vengeance upon them, for to you I have committed my cause. Jeremiah has gone back to his hometown, and you might have thought he might have got a good reception there, but it's not without cause that there is a saying that even Jesus repeated, that a prophet is not welcome or recognised in their hometown. But it's one thing to not be recognised, it's another thing when they think they're going to try and assassinate you, murder you, eliminate you, annihilate you. That's what Jeremiah is experiencing here, and he's angry and he's upset. Verse 21, therefore this is what the Lord says about the men of Anathoth, that's Jeremiah's hometown, who are seeking your life and saying, do not prophesy in the name of the Lord, or you will die by our hands. Therefore this is what the Lord Almighty says, I will punish them. Their young men will die by the sword, their sons and daughters by famine. Not even a remnant will be left to them, because I will bring disaster on the men of Anathoth in the year of their punishment. So God is predicting some pretty tough things to happen to Jeremiah's countrymen, but they've said some pretty terrible things about him. And Jeremiah now raises his complaint, his confession, his challenge to God. Chapter 12 verse 1. You are always righteous, O Lord, when I bring a case before you. Yet I would speak with you about your justice. Here's an interesting one. Jeremiah knows what orthodoxy is. He says, look, you are always righteous. You always do the right thing. That's what he should be saying to God. That's a good line for a worship song or a confession or a creed. But he says, look, I know this is true about you. You're always righteous. And yet there's a disconnect, there's a distance between what Jeremiah knows about God philosophically, theoretically, theologically, and what he's experiencing about God. That gap, that disappointment, that disillusionment is the challenge. And Jeremiah says, yet I would speak with you about your justice. That's a brave thing to say to God. Jeremiah says, I know you're righteous, and yet I need to have a conversation with you about your justice. Now, do you remember when Abraham was struggling with God? He says, will not the judge of all the earth do what is right? So there's a common understanding throughout the whole of the Bible that God is a good judge. He's just and upright. And yet sometimes we don't experience him like that. What should we do when we have that disconnect? Well, Jeremiah brings it before God. Why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why do all the faithless live at ease? You have planted them and they have taken root, and they grow and bear fruit. You are always on their lips but far from their hearts. Jeremiah's upset about the hypocrisy he sees in his opponents. They're always saying things about God, but living a very different way. They're great at speaking, they're incredibly eloquent, but they live a different way. They're wicked, and yet they're still prospering. Yet you know me, O Lord. You see me and test my thoughts about you. Drag them off like sheep to be butchered. Set them apart for the day of slaughter. How long will the land lie parched and the grass in every field be withered? Because those who live in it are wicked. The animals and birds have perished. Moreover, the people are saying, he will not see what happens to us. So Jeremiah's got a whole bunch of feelings going on in his head. He says, look, I look at them and I see their hypocrisy. And I know you look at me, God, you see my innermost thoughts, and you know I'm trying to do the right thing. God, why won't you bring justice? Why will you allow the wicked to prosper? That doesn't seem fair. And then he's pouring out his anger to God. We've seen that in some of the Psalms. There's room, it seems, for people to be able to bring a complaint against God and to vent to God all their angry and violent feelings. Notice, as we've noted before, Jeremiah doesn't say, and God, because you haven't done anything, I'm now going to go and sort these guys out. I'm going to bring judgment and justice. No, Jeremiah says, you need to sort this out, God. Please, would you bring justice? Would you wheel them off? Because what they're doing is causing harm. This hypocrisy is actually polluting the land. And as we'll see in the book of Jeremiah, it leads to the expulsion of God's people from the promised land. And so it's having a huge negative effect. And so Jeremiah is saying, God, get involved, sort these out, drag them off instead of dragging all the nations off. Now, what do you do with this? How do you cope with this? Why is this in the Bible? I love the reality of the Bible, the honesty. The warts and all picture of what faith looks like. For some people, faith is just, I don't know, Mary Poppins. She's always smiling and singing, and no matter how hard it gets, you just whistle a happy tune and stuff will be okay. That's not real Christianity. That's not real faith. That's some kind of facade. That's a projection to the world of how we want it to be. But the reality is not like that. I watched the film A Beautiful Day in the Neighbourhood, and it was all about the incredible story of Mr. Rogers, an American TV expert. He was brilliant at helping children to deal with some really difficult emotions, and he was a Christian. It was his faith that led him into this work, and he had to present a calmness to the children because it was important for them to have someone that could guide them through difficult emotions. And he was honest about the struggles and the ups and the downs of life. He talks about bereavement, he talks about war, he talks about racism. And he did that with a very calm exterior, and he tried to always be gracious and kind when he dealt with people. But in the film, there's also space for him to play all the dark notes at the piano at the same time, to be able to vent some of his frustrations. And for some of us, we have that role, maybe a little bit like Mr. Rogers. We've got a public face. We've got to show that we're kind of together and okay. And some of that's really helpful. Because, you know, if you go to see a brain surgeon and they're a bit too vulnerable with you, they tell you, oh, you know, I'm really worried about this operation I'm about to do on you. I'm not sure I've got the capability. I'm having imposter syndrome. That's not necessarily going to help you, the patient, to be confident. So sometimes it's appropriate for us to present a kind of non-anxious presence towards the world, a calmness. And that's really useful. Sometimes leaders need to do that. Sometimes we need to let people in a little bit to be vulnerable about the things that we're struggling with. And Jeremiah is doing that here by allowing his words to be written in Scripture for us to know that these kind of thoughts, this sense of injustice and anger and disconnect and disillusionment with God is okay. But the most important thing I think here is that we can't put on a facade or a front towards God. God knows our hearts. He knows what's going on. And Jeremiah recognises that. So there's kind of no point hiding these things from God. He might as well bring them out to God. Now, I'm someone that struggles with prayer in all sorts of levels. Group prayer, personal prayer, one-on-one prayer, prayer with another person. Prayer is something I find difficult. And I want to be challenged here by Jeremiah showing me what honesty in prayer looks like, being able to wrestle with God with those really dark thoughts, dark ideas, and being able to bring them to him. Now, God is incredibly generous to Jeremiah. In fact, God's response is a little bit like that picture. I don't know if you saw it in the newspapers of Boris Johnson. I think he was walking through Hyde Park, I think it was. Or maybe it's St James's Park. Maybe he was on his way to see the Queen. I can't quite remember which London park it was. And there's a man standing there waving his finger at Boris Johnson 2 metres away, so social distancing was employed. Waving his finger. He looks really angry. He's telling Boris Johnson off. And a few people posted that on Twitter. And they said, look, it's actually a privilege that in our country we have the right to be able to say that or act in this way to the highest officials in the land, to the Prime Minister of the country, and there won't be any negative repercussions. We don't live in a dictatorship. We have something called freedom of speech. And as far as I know, Boris Johnson didn't name and shame that guy for expressing his opinions so strongly. And if that's true for us in our nation, that we have that opportunity to be able to present honest feelings to those who are in power over us, how much more is it true for us and God, that God gives us the incredible privilege of daring to speak to him? Can you imagine the bravado in Jeremiah? I know you're righteous, God, but I would like to have a word with you about justice. You know, he is talking to the judge of all the earth, and he's so confident in God and his grace and his compassion that he could even raise that really tricky subject. So I think there is comfort here for those of us that are dealing and wrestling with dark thoughts, anger, disappointment with God. I think we're permissioned in Jeremiah to be able to speak those out to God. And that can be part of us putting things right, that we're not bottling things up. This isn't just cathartic therapy, but this is part of strengthening our relationship with God and dealing with those things that we're coping with inside. I need to read you a little bit of God's response. It's kind of surprising, but have a look. Verse 5, chapter 12. If you have raced with men on foot and they have worn you out, how can you compete with horses? If you stumble in the safe country, how will you manage in the thickets of the Jordan? Your brothers, your own family, even they have betrayed you. They have raised a loud cry against you. Do not trust them, though they speak well of you. If you have raced with men and on foot and they have worn you out, how can you compete with horses? That's a challenge, isn't it? Jeremiah, this is relatively easy what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to go to your people and talk to them about my justice. And God's saying, look, if you're worn out already, wait till you start having to run with horses. That's going to be way beyond you. I don't know, I find that quite discouraging, that actually these death threats from his family, neighbours, people he grew up with, that's the easy bit. The harder bit is yet to come. That's not necessarily what I want to hear. I want to hear God going, it's okay, don't worry, the future will be better, I'll hold your hand. But there is a hard side to God, that he's training us to be involved in his work. And sometimes that is going to be really tough. Maybe it's like the pace setter in a marathon. They've got to keep you going so that you keep going to the end. They've got to set the pace that's going to make you breathless so that you keep going. God is trying to increase Jeremiah's ability to deal with stress and difficulty and hatred and oppression. And he's saying, it's going to get harder. I guess I love God's honesty too. He doesn't sugarcoat this, make it easy. He doesn't write a kind of Hallmark greeting card to him and tell him, it's okay, I'm not that kind of God, I'm only going to ask you to do easy stuff. No, God is bigger than even our ability to cope. And he's going to keep pushing us so that we're more like him. In fact, I wonder whether this is part of God's strategy for Jeremiah. I wonder if Jeremiah is being allowed to experience how God is feeling about his people. God has loved this people. He's brought them to himself at great cost. He's sacrificed for them. He's cried with them. He's been patient with them, and yet they've rejected him and they've turned to other gods. They've wished God was dead, and now Jeremiah's experiencing a little bit that as his prophet. That as Jeremiah speaks on God's behalf, he's getting the same reaction that God has been getting. And that is very challenging, but it's also an incredible privilege that Jeremiah is experiencing something of the heart of God in the rejection of his own people. Friends, I wish I could tell you that Christianity is easy, that being a follower of God is simple, and that it will just mean that we won't have any anxiety or pain in our lives. I can't promise you that. The Bible doesn't promise you that. The only version of the Bible that promises that is the one that doesn't have any words from God in it, the one that we write ourselves. And if you want a religion like that, then get a notebook, not a Bible. A notebook's a blank page. You can fill it with all your dreams and hopes. But we have a revealed religion here. We have a faith that comes from God, and sometimes there's a challenge here. And the challenge is, it's not going to be easy, that if you follow God, there is going to be opposition. But God does comfort Jeremiah to say, look, I am with you. I understand. I know what you're going through. I see you. And I'm listening to you. And I invite you to come and tell me how you're feeling. I won't blow you up and tell you off if you do. But you do need to know that I am working on you. You're my prodigy, my project that I am developing. And I'm going to train you, Jeremiah, so that you can cope with this and even more. Maybe that's a help, friends. This is a bit of a cliffhanger. There's more to come tomorrow. How do you keep trusting God? How do you keep carrying on when the world is against you? Well, I guess you're in good company. You're in the company of prophets throughout history that have experienced that and still stayed faithful to God. You are in the company of God too, because God experiences that as the world turns its back on him. God says, I understand what you're going through. I'll be with you and we will see this one out. It's been a pleasure. Join me again tomorrow for the next edition of FAQ.